Man, I'm excited for the fall, and there's so much great stuff happening, and it's starting to remind me of what things were like before, and so I'm excited for that to find new things to do, and also new ways to do old things, and I'm so grateful to be a part of a church that's committed to creating fun and space and ways to invite people. Have you guys ever gone strawberry picking before? It is so much fun for like a half of a pint. And then it's like, yeah, I'm over this. I'll just buy these at the store. It's a very romantic thing, this idea of like, yeah, let's go pick some fresh berries. It's like, this isn't that fun. There's a story, and it takes place a number of years ago. There was a family that immigrated to the U.S. from Mexico, and the daughter was, she was one of the younger in the family, and she really wanted to be able to work. Her dad didn't want her to work at all, and so she was begging and begging and begging, and she was begging to be able to go work at a strawberry field to be able to pick strawberries, and her father, kind of considering what I also would believe to be true, is like, yeah, there's no way this is going to last. She's not going to be able to be able to keep this job. There's no way she's going to enjoy this. And so he gives her permission to go and get a job picking strawberries in this field. And assuming she might make it a day, maybe 2 days, well, she's elated. She's overjoyed. She goes, she starts picking strawberries, and she comes home every day. And he's asking questions, trying to find out how the experience has been, surprised that she's still doing this day after day. And what he didn't know is that this young woman, as she was picking strawberries, there was a young man that was also working there picking strawberries. And this young man thought that this woman was beautiful. And so he would always figure out a way to pick strawberries in the same row that she was picking. And he would go along and he would pick strawberries and put them in his pint because he got paid for how many you picked. But he would also pick strawberries and leave them in a little pile for her to pick up off the ground and to put in hers. He was making her job easier and easier with every single step. And so she loved it. She ended up falling in love with him, and that is how my father-in-law and my mother-in-law met and fell in love. And that story, I think, is one of the most amazing stories. It's so beautiful. This is something out of like a Notebook type of story. This is like, you've got to be kidding me. He picked the strawberries for her and left them on the ground. I mean, it's just like, it's so adorable. There are some of these stories that never get old. There's some of these stories, I mean, I've heard that story a number of times. I think about that story oftentimes, and every single time I hear it or I think about it, it's like, that is so amazing. Like, what an amazing story. I love my wife very deeply. You guys know how lucky I am. My wife is incredible. We do not have a cute story of how we met. It was like one of those like, is this guy ever going to figure out how to get his life together and make a smart decision for? I mean, it's just that's not my story. But that story about my in-laws, I love it so much. When I hear that story, it makes me want to live. It makes me want to do something adventurous. It makes me want to kind of take a step and say, man, what kind of life am I living? What kind of life am I creating? What are the decisions that I'm making? The crazy thing about that story is that I hadn't heard it until about a year and a half ago, and most of my family, my in-laws, hadn't really heard it even from their parents until a couple of years ago as well. The story wasn't actually too far off from never being heard, which is kind of tragic. This story is amazing. You could make an entire movie out of this, and it's only a number of years away from that story never being heard. One of the most important things that we have to choose to believe is that you and I have a story that is just as powerful as that one. It may be about a different thing, it may be pointing a different direction, but each of us have stories. And these stories are at risk of never being heard. These stories are at risk of never being heard by other people, and it's not their fault. It's because oftentimes we feel like, I don't need to tell them about that. I don't need to share that with them. You may not have the love story like that one, but every one of us has a story worth telling. We just don't usually think that our stories are worth telling. We think things like, well, my story's not really powerful enough, or it's not dramatic enough. My story isn't tragic enough. Nothing that crazy happened. My wife and I, when we met, I had not really lived that crazy of a life, but I had just made a ton of terrible choices. And so there was plenty of opportunities for me to tell all of these crazy stories about the mistakes I had made and the trouble that I had gotten into. And I asked her, I said, well, tell me about your life, tell me about your story. And even other people over the years have asked my wife, how did you become a Christian? Well, tell me about your life. She's like, I don't really have that interesting of a story. Like I grew up in a Christian family and I've always believed in Jesus and I've never really made a single mistake. No, she doesn't say that, but she really, she really walked a pretty straight line her whole life, and so there's this piece that she carried around for so many years where she really didn't believe that she had a good story. The crazy thing is that there's so many other people that had a similar story and also thought that they didn't have a good story. But the reality is that these stories, what they do is they change us. They give us power. They give us hope. But we tell ourselves, man, it's been uneventful. People don't want to hear about my experience. There's a woman named Babette Buster. She is kind of considered to be a story guru. She taught film and story writing classes at USC. Small companies like Disney and Pixar pay her to come in and fix their stories when they're in production and they're like, this isn't really making sense. Can you come help us tell this story in a way that will make grown adults weep at a cartoon, every Pixar movie. And she comes in and she helps kind of coach them on how to tell stories. She has this amazing quote. She says that stories are the fire that we carry to each other. Stories are the fire that we carry to each other. As you think about a fire brings warmth, it brings safety, it brings familiarity, it brings comfort, it brings hope, it brings clarity, sight, so you can actually see what's going on. Our stories do the same thing. Our stories are the fire that we bring. Our stories bring comfort and hope. They bring warmth. They bring clarity. They bring a sense of safety to other people as they hear the stories that we share. There's something about our stories that all of a sudden lets people just kind of take a breath and say, okay, I'm not the only one. Okay, somebody has been through harder things than I have. Okay, here's how they dealt with these types of challenges in their life. Stories are the fire that we carry to each other, and to tell your story is to let other people know that they are not alone. Your story not only reveals who you are, but it reveals who God is and what God is up to. That is why your story matters. Your story doesn't matter because you're awesome. Your story doesn't matter because you've gotten it all figured out. Your story doesn't matter because you have conquered dragons and you've defeated evil and you have the most amazing, meet cute story about picking strawberries and that's how you melt. Those aren't the reasons why your story matters. Your story matters is because it points to God. It points to a greater reality. It points to what God is doing. If the creator of the universe, if the God of hope has somehow impacted your life, if he has helped shape who you are today, if you have heard from God, maybe not audibly, but maybe just this sense in your spirit that God has spoken to you, that God has led you in a certain way, that your life is different because of who God is, if you have had some sort of interaction with the all-powerful creator of the heavens and the earth, I would say that's a pretty amazing story, and that is worth being told. That's worth sharing about. It doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers, that you have to know all the theology, that you have to be able to quote every scripture, but you have an experience with the creator, and there is something beautiful and power, and you need to know whether you have made a lifetime of poor choices or you've never even hit a speed bump in your life, that your story is worth telling. Frederick Buechner is a theologian, or was a theologian, writer, preacher, and this is a little bit of a long quote, but I love the way that he says this, and so I'm going to read it slowly and maybe twice because I want us to be able to internalize this. He says, "My story is important, not because it's mine, but because if I tell it anything like right, the chances are you will recognize that in many ways it is also yours. We're not that different. It's precisely through these stories and all of their particularity that God makes himself known to each of us more powerfully and personally. If this is true, it means that to lose track of our stories is to be profoundly impoverished, not only humanly, but also spiritually. to lose track of our stories, to stop telling them, or to never tell our stories. It not only robs us as individual human people, it not only robs people around us from the benefit of hearing these stories, but it also causes us to be impoverished spiritually because our stories let us know who God is, what he's done, what type of God this God is, the way this God shows up. We need to tell other people our stories. We need to do this for our own good. We need to do this for other people's good. And we tell our stories on behalf of God. And this week, I want to look at a story of someone who had no name, had a messy past, was the wrong gender, and she was from a despised tribe of people. This person did almost nothing of note except tell her story. And it made it into the scriptures. It made it into the gospel. It's an incredible story. It's in John chapter 4. Jesus is traveling with the disciples. If you remember, they didn't have cars at this point in time, so they're always walking. I don't know if you guys remember that part from the Bible, but it says in verse 4, it says, he had to go through Samaria on the way. Eventually, he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Please give me a drink." It's important, I think, to know that Jacob's well, this is a real place. You can actually go here today. It still exists. This isn't some mythological story that was made up. This is a real place. And when John would have written his gospel, he would have written it with an understanding of, hey, I'm saying that this is near Sychar, where Jacob's well is. This is where that happened. You can go there. Jesus asks this Samaritan woman for a drink of water. She's surprised. She's confused. She's disturbed a little bit because they didn't have COVID there. And so everybody shared cups all the time. Unless you were a Jewish person and a Samaritan person, you would never share a cup with a Samaritan as a Jewish person. You would be unclean. And actually, in that time, men weren't even really supposed to talk to women that were not part of their family. And Jews were not supposed to talk to Samaritans. And rabbis were certainly not supposed to talk to Samaritans. Everything about this story is wrong. This conversation goes on and it becomes kind of spiritual in nature. They start to talk about worship, and she shares a little bit about her understandings of where the best place to worship is. And Jesus, ultimately, he tells her that he offers living water. And what he means by that is a sense of true fulfillment, true purpose. But he's sitting at a well, and he had asked for a drink, and he says, well, I actually can offer living water. And you can imagine her excitement. She says, please, sir, give me this water. Then I will never be thirsty again, and I won't have to come here to get water. He's talking about something spiritual, and she is thinking of just very practically. She doesn't quite grasp what Jesus is saying yet, but what is so incredibly clear in this story is that this woman wants to be invisible. This woman does not want to have to be out here in public anymore. This woman felt unwanted. This woman felt pushed aside. Life, people, her story was not one that she wanted to be public. The story goes on, and ultimately Jesus articulates that she has had a number of husbands before. And I grew up in a church where we always talked about how terrible this woman was. Like, what a floozy, she's had 5 husbands. And the interesting thing is that this woman could not have really done this on her own. A woman in this point of time had no legal ability to divorce her husband. Every divorce that she would have done or been a part of or have had would have actually been something instigated by the husband. This woman isn't necessarily a painful story or a checkered past because she's crazy. Life has been hard for her. People have made decisions for her or against her or on her behalf that she had no control over. And nobody would go in the middle of the day to get water because that was the hottest point in the day. You would go early and you would get enough water to last all day. She goes in the middle of the day because she knows there will be nobody else there. I don't have to talk to anybody. Nobody needs to know who I am. Nobody needs to point at me. Nobody needs to be aware of my past, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whatever it is. She wants to be invisible. She does not want to stand out or to be seen in any way. And I, just as a sidebar, I believe that many of us kind of feel that same thing. And maybe you felt that in the past. Maybe some of you feel that today. This belief that because of your past, you want to be as invisible as possible. Because of your past, you want to make sure that nobody ever finds out. Because of your past experiences or mistakes or what's happened to you, you feel this desire to be as invisible as possible. And I think it's important to note that Jesus didn't accidentally go through Samaria. It says he had to go through Samaria. Jesus didn't accidentally sit down at a well and accidentally wait for this woman to show up who he accidentally knew all of her story. Jesus talks to this woman because he loved this woman, because this woman mattered, her story mattered, and she was not the sum total of her story, that Jesus was inviting her into something greater. The story goes on in verse 25. It says, the woman says, I know that the Messiah is coming, the one who is called Christ. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And then Jesus told her, hey, that's me. Not really. He said, I am the Messiah. This woman is thrilled and amazed and confused. And so it says she left her water jar beside the well and she runs back to the village telling everyone. This is a mile away. Literally, we know this. The well is a mile away from the village. She runs back and she tells everyone, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did, which again is not a point of pride for her. This is not a woman that would want attention at all, especially attention about her life and her decisions or the decisions that were made for her. Yet she's running into the middle of the town, shouting for everyone's attention, saying, I met a man who told me everything about my life. And you guys already know most of it. You know how crazy it is. I met a man who told me everything. So the people came streaming from the village to see him. The power of telling her story convinced other people to come. It says in verse 39, many Samaritans from the village believed in Jesus because the woman had said, he told me everything I did. I just want to pause there. A lot of them believed in Jesus because of her story. Her story alone was enough to say, that is believable. That is impressive. I believe in who Jesus is because of your story. When they came out to see him, they begged him to stay in their village, so he stayed for 2 days, long enough for many more to hear his message and believe. Then they said to the woman, now we believe not just because of what you told us, but because we have heard him ourselves. Now we know that he is indeed the Savior of the world. So a lot of them heard her story and they were like, I'm in. I believe. I hear it. I see the change that happened in you. I see the fact that you're here in the middle of town getting all of our attention. I believe. And then others needed to hear it for themselves. So she led them to Jesus, and then they invited Jesus to stay in their town. And ultimately, many more believed. She didn't have all of the answers. And in fact, it's funny because when she goes back to the town to tell him, she said, I met a man who told me everything. I had this experience. Listen to my story. And then she says, do you think it might be the Messiah? She doesn't even know. She's not even confident. She's not even 100% sure that she can explain how it works. But she told her story because she knew that others would want to hear it and would want to have that same experience that she did. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't have an incredible story. She didn't have any popularity. She just had her story, her experience, and the belief that others would want to experience that same thing. Jesus used this nameless, messy past, wrong gender, wrong ethnicity woman to change an entire village. Not because she was so great, but just because she told her story. She said, here's the experience that I had. Here's what I experienced. She went on and told other people, and those people told other people, And those people told other people what they experienced. And those people told other people what they experienced. And this goes on, this cycle, generation after generation. And you and I are benefactors of people that told their story to other people. We did not hear Jesus speak for himself. We heard other people tell their stories about what Jesus had done in their lives. It started off with the first followers of Jesus, and then the first church, and then the scriptures started being written, and the gospel accounts. They're not just books, they're actually, here is the story of what Jesus did. These stories, generation after generation, are why we are still here 2,000 years later, still here, because people have shared their stories, even though they weren't always popular, even though they weren't perfect, even though they knew that not everyone would respond positively. I said something along the lines of, I can't believe what I experienced. And actually, you might not believe what I experienced either. But I'm going to tell you, and if you want, you can come with me and see. You can come and hear him for yourself. You can come to the place that I found this hope. You can come and experience this with me. She told them her story, and then she led them to the place that she found hope. For her, it was a rabbi sitting at a well in the middle of the day. For you, it may be a small group. It may have been a church camp when you were younger. It may be a serve opportunity. It may be a conversation with friends. It may be a video or a podcast of something that's impacted you. We all have these experiences in our life where it's like, that changed me. Something happened. I heard God differently. I felt God differently. I'm different now after that conversation, after seeing, after hearing, after being around that place. Something is different. She led people to the well. And my question is, what is it that we are leading people to? What story are we telling? Are we inviting people to experience what we have experienced? Not because we have all the answers, not because we have it all figured out, but because we just experienced something that we believe others will want. You know, it's interesting. I was talking with some people this week, and they shared that 80% of Christians, 80% of Jesus followers start following Jesus before they turn 12 years old. 80%. That's a lot. It's almost 100. I don't know if you guys know that. 80% before they are 12 years old, they start following Jesus. This means that 80% of Christians, 80% of Jesus followers make that decision somehow in Sunday school, in a camp, in a VBS, some sort of experience where they're able to hear this good news. Maybe their parents shared it with them or a grandparent. This is so important for us to be able to create these experiences for people to understand who Jesus is. This is why today we're relaunching our elementary service and the 10:30, because we want these kids to be able to hear the good news and the hope that we have found, that we've experienced. We want them to hear it in a way that they can understand and they can believe too. She told them her story, and then she led them to the place that she found hope. Romans chapter 10, Paul is writing this letter to the Romans, and he says this phrase. I'm going to break it down a little bit differently for you guys, but he says this. He says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Do we agree? Thank you, Steve. Do you guys agree at home? I can see you again. I'm just kidding. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. That's great. Yes. And then he says, but how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? Oh, that's a good point. How do we get people to believe in him? And then he goes on and he says, and how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? Valid point, Paul. You're pretty smart. And then he says, and how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? Paul is trying to break it down as simply as he can so that people can understand everyone has the opportunity to experience the grace of God, the hope, the love, the purpose in their life. Everyone has this opportunity, but they'll never actually be able to experience it unless they believe. And they can't believe unless they hear. And they can't hear unless somebody tells them. So what do you think we should do? I think we should tell them. Because it's not our responsibility to save them. That's what God does. And it's not our responsibility to make them believe either. That's a decision that they get to make. And God helps in that process. God's Spirit helps in that process. You know what our responsibility is? To tell them, to share, to tell about our story. And it doesn't mean that I need you to put a bunch of like Bible tracts in your pockets and walk around and kind of be creepy about it. And that's not what I'm saying. But there are opportunities constantly around us where people are experiencing things in their life, when we have conversations and we have an opportunity to share about what we have experienced, we are invited to tell. We are not asked to save them. We are not asked to make them believe. We are invited to tell them, and if we don't tell them, they will never have the opportunity. You are their best hope at hearing the good news of Jesus. It could be somebody else that tells them, but I want each of us to understand I am my friend's best hope. You are your coworker's best hope. If we walk around with that type of intentionality, not to be the greatest theologian, but to be like this nameless woman that said, here's what I experienced. It's pretty crazy. If you don't believe me, you can come with me. You can come and see it. You can come and hear it. You can experience who this God is. Your story, the painful, the difficult parts, the confusing parts, the disjointed parts, the beautiful, the hopeful parts. It's not just for you. Your story and my story is the fire that we carry to others to provide comfort and hope and light and clarity and a sense of safety. Our stories, God uses our stories to change other people's lives, to lead other people to Him. And so, what I want to do, I've got 3 minutes left, and I want to just get super practical, and I'm going to go very fast. So, if you guys are watching online, pay attention. If you guys are in the room, just keep doing you. Practically speaking, there's two kind of questions that I want to try and answer. The first one is, how do I tell my story? Because, like, where do I start? I was born in I'm not going to tell you. Where do I start? Like, do I start at the beginning? Do I start like at the most painful parts or the best parts? Or do I start like before my parents met and they fell in love? And do you know how babies? No, it's like where do we start? So the most simple way is this kind of idea to start off with, this is what was then. This is what was then. This is, I was frustrated, or I was lonely, or I was angry at everybody, or I was an addict, or I was struggling with this, or I had everything that anybody could really want, but I just felt a little bit empty kind of in the midst of that. This is what was then. And then you just share, this is what I experienced. I heard a song on the radio and it just like started, I kind of just got like a little emotional, and it was really bizarre because I never really believed in anything about this before. Or somebody invited me to church, or my Sunday school teacher told me something, or I don't, whatever it was. This is what was then. This is what I experienced. This man told me everything about my life. That's what I experienced. And then this is what I am now. That's it. That's as simple as that. It's not telling your whole story. It's not explaining the entire theology of God. It's not understanding every single verse or scripture, although those things are great, and I want us to be able to learn and memorize and grow. It is just simply saying, this is what I was, this is what I experienced, and this is who I am now. I'm not perfect. I don't have it all figured out. I don't have all the answers, but here's how it has impacted me. It is as simple as that. And then the second question is, when is a good time to invite someone? And the obvious answer is all the time. But I will give you guys something that I learned a few years ago that has been helpful for me. It's called the 3 knots. The 3 knots. Anytime you hear somebody say one of these phrases, it's a really great opportunity to invite them to experience church, to invite them to experience your small group, to invite them to experience whatever it might be. The first one is if somebody says that things are not going well, which is like kind of hard because that's all of us. It's 2020, I get it. So, but somebody says things are not going well, a coworker, a friend, a parent of somebody else at school, whatever it might be, things are not going well. Maybe it's been difficult financially or relationally, it's been challenging, or they're just struggling with anxiety or depression. Things are not going well. Well, you get to say, "Oh, man, I would love for you to come and check out my church. We do something called Financial Peace University. It's a really incredible class that helps you get clarity on your finances. We're going to have marriage courses, and it could actually help you navigate your relationships, you know. We do sermon series. We're actually going to spend an entire month talking about family relationships, and maybe it's something that would be beneficial for you. Anytime you hear someone say things are not going well, as a church, our goal is to be able to serve people in the most practical ways we can. The second not is whenever you hear someone say, I was not prepared. I was not prepared. I was not ready for that. And nobody is more not prepared. I don't think that's correct grammatically. Nobody is more not prepared than new parents. This morning, I think we actually have someone in our church that may be having a baby. They have no idea what is coming. And I didn't tell them that. They don't need to know that they're not prepared. They've got enough on their mind, but they're a part of a church that is prepared, and they're a part of a small group that is even more prepared because we reached out to them and said, hey, do you guys need us to help set up like a meal train for you guys to bring food for you guys after you get home with this baby because you're not prepared for how tired you're going to be? And you know what they said? They said, our small group has already done that. There's people that knew that we weren't going to be prepared and they've already stepped in. They've already shown up. Anytime you hear someone say things are not going well, or that I was not prepared, or I do not have a church, it's always a great opportunity to invite someone. And it's not because church is what saves them, just like it wasn't the well that saved the Samaritan woman or her entire village. It's because of who was there. Jesus was there, and Jesus is here. And he's out there also. It's not that Jesus isn't out there, but it's this invitation to a place where they can have an experience, where we can try and provide the best opportunity possible. This woman showed up in a completely desolate scene where there was nobody there and she wanted nothing to do with anybody. And she was able to focus specifically on this rabbi sitting at a well and was able to have this conversation in a way that she couldn't have any other place. And church, one of the reasons why we believe the church is the hope of the world is because we get to set up opportunities for people to have an experience with Jesus that they may not be able to have those any other place. Man, I hope that we can be like this woman, this nameless, messy past, wrong gender, terrible tribe, this person that did almost nothing of note except just change the trajectory of her entire village because she told her story. Let's pray together.